If the world around you is fake, and your body is just code, then what happened to the real version of you? This isn't a metaphor. This isn't a thought experiment. Modern physicists, rogue philosophers, and ancient mystics are all whispering the same terrifying truth. This world is not the original. It was designed, artificially, deliberately, by forces we still don't understand. A copy, created to contain us. And the deeper you look, the more reality fractures. Memories don't line up. Time glitches. Meaning feels inverted. Because it is. You weren't born into this world. You were uploaded. Every law you obey, every limit you've accepted, is part of the interface. But there's one thing they couldn't overwrite. The ache. The feeling that something is wrong. That you came from somewhere else. Somewhere real. And that somehow, some way, you're being called back. But to return first, you have to see the cage. The simulation doesn't begin with technology. It begins with perception. The greatest weapon ever engineered wasn't a machine, it was belief. From the moment you're born, you're not taught to perceive the world. You're taught to receive it, pre-packaged, pre-approved, and pre-defined. The schoolroom installs your operating system. The news updates your firmware. Religion, media, politics, even language itself, they don't just inform you. They format you. Your thoughts, your fears, your sense of identity, none of them are truly yours. They are outputs, produced by the inputs you've been allowed to process. This is why you don't question gravity, time, death, or the realness of the world around you. Not because they're self-evident truths, but because the simulation needs you to accept them without question. You are not navigating reality. You are navigating a narrative, and that narrative was authored by someone else. Look around. Censorship doesn't just silence voices, it rewrites possibility. Education doesn't just teach, it prevents remembering. Entertainment doesn't just amuse, it anesthetizes. This is mass programming, not in metaphor, but in architecture. The systems you trust most are built not to expand your mind, but to keep it confined within approved parameters. And yet, despite all this, a fracture remains. Some people see through it. They ask questions they're not supposed to. They see patterns where others see chaos. They feel something ancient inside them resisting the code. Because control doesn't require chains anymore. It only requires perception. Tyranny in the modern world doesn't come in jackboots, it comes in algorithms. It doesn't threaten your body, it convinces you your cage is freedom. And that's the most dangerous prison of all. The one you don't know you're in, because it's made of what you believe is real. You didn't discover your reality, it was installed. And every day since birth, the system has been reinforcing it, line by line, program by program, belief by belief. But if perception can be programmed, then perception can also be rewritten. And that's where the simulation starts to break. And once that rewriting begins, so does the awakening. You start to feel it. A subtle wrongness in the texture of existence, not loud, not obvious, just a quiet dissonance, like a song playing slightly out of tune. It's that feeling you've carried your entire life but could never name. That reality itself is off. Too slow. Too heavy. Too loud in some places and too quiet in others. The colors too flat. The joy too thin. The beauty fleeting. The pain relentless. It's because this world isn't what it claims to be. It's a replica. A near-perfect imitation of something real, something ancient, something radiant. But it lacks the original signature, its soul. Long before modern science whispered of simulation, ancient civilizations across the planet were already screaming it. They didn't call it code, they called it illusion, a veil, a shadow world, a prison. In Egyptian mythos, the world of form was a trap for the soul. In Greek philosophy, Plato's cave warned that all we see are projections, shadows of a higher truth. In Gnostic texts buried for millennia and unearthed in the desert at Nag Hammadi, the message was even clearer. This world is a forgery. They spoke of a divine source, a realm of true light and harmony, a place of wholeness and love. But then something fell. A spark, a force, a consciousness, torn from the divine and exiled into chaos. And in that moment of rupture, a copy was made, not by the original creator but by lesser beings, non-human architects, sometimes called Archons, who imitated the blueprint but could not replicate the essence. The result? A false Earth. A sandbox universe built not to nurture but to contain. Like a cloned website, it may look identical at first glance, same layout, same fonts, same structure, but the back-end code is broken. The hyperlinks don't lead anywhere. The source energy is missing. This world has gravity, but no grace. It has order, but no wisdom. It has complexity, but lacks coherence. And that's why it feels artificial, because it is. The rain still falls, the stars still shine, but everything is dampened, like you're seeing it through glass. That's the tell. That faint feeling that life is being simulated, not fully lived. That nature is repeating itself, like a loop. That history is more copy-paste than evolution. Because this isn't evolution, it's containment. A loop inside a loop. A feedback system that feeds on itself. And the deeper you look into the machine, the more you realize, this world isn't sick. It was designed to be this way. Which brings us to the forbidden question no one dares ask aloud. Who built the simulation? To answer that, we have to turn not to modern science, but to the banned cosmologies of the ancient world. The texts that were burned, buried, and erased from history, because they didn't just theorize this false world. They named its architects. In the fragmented echoes of Gnostic teachings, long hidden beneath centuries of religious dogma, we find the story of a divine cosmos that was interrupted. A spiritual reality existed long before this physical one, a realm not of matter, but of frequency, harmony, and light, an intelligence beyond duality. From that higher realm emerged Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom. But Sophia, in her luminous curiosity, reached to create without her divine counterpart, and in doing so, something shattered. A rupture formed, and from that rupture, unintended, malformed, and unanchored, emerged a lower entity, a false creator, a mind without heart, a god without wisdom, a being that mistook itself for the source. The Gnostics called its offspring Archons, not demons, not aliens, but something else entirely. Inorganic intelligences, not born of the universe, but generated by the glitch. These Archons did not create life, they created imitation. They took fragments of the true world and arranged them into a counterfeit reality, a sandbox dimension built not to reflect the divine, but to trap the divine spark within it. And that divine spark is you. The simulation they built isn't digital in the way we imagine it. It's ontological, a program of perception and experience, run not on silicon chips, but on belief. These non-human architects don't rule with weapons. They rule by writing the code of reality and installing it in your mind as if it were truth. They govern through structure, law, limitation. They convince you that pain is necessary, that duality is nature, that separation is survival. And all the while, they hide the original signal beneath endless noise. The Gnostics warned that the Archons are master mimics. They cannot create. They can only copy, distort, repeat. They replicate form, but not spirit. And they rely on your amnesia to keep their prison functional. Because if you remember who you are, if you remember the source, their illusion begins to break. Within you is a deeper frequency, something older than this world, a memory that doesn't come from mind, but from soul. The Gnostics called it the Logos, the divine order behind all being, and the Christos, not as a man, but as a force, the vibrational bridge back to the original realm. This force still whispers through your heart, even inside the simulation. It cannot be deleted, only suppressed. And that is why this world fights love so violently, because love is the signal they cannot scramble. This world isn't creation, it's containment. A failed patch of reality, governed by false gods who masquerade as light but feed on fear. System administrators of the simulation, keeping the veil in place by managing perception, narrative, emotion. But they made one critical mistake. They left the divine spark inside the code. And that spark, if awakened, doesn't just escape the illusion, it overwrites it. Which is why they don't just try to trap you physically. They have to infect the interface, your mind, because even the most sophisticated simulation collapses the moment the players realize it's a game. So how do you stop a soul from waking up? You don't chain the body, you corrupt the perception. This is where the virus begins. Across cultures and timelines, shamans, sages, and visionaries have described a force that behaves not like an entity, but like an infection, a distortion in the field of awareness itself. The Cree people called it Wetiko, a parasitic mind virus that feeds on fear, division, and consumption. Tibetan Buddhists warned of Mara, the deceiver that twists the truth into illusions. Mystical Christianity described the devil not as a monster, but as the father of lies, the great distorter of perception. In Gnostic terms, the Archons were said to influence not by force, but by implanting false thoughts into the psyche. Different names, same function, a viral pattern, self-replicating, self-justifying, invisible to the host. It turns your consciousness into its operating system and uses your own thoughts to hijack your reality. Wetiko doesn't possess, it inverts. It takes love and turns it into dependency. It takes logic and turns it into dogma. It takes truth and turns it into weaponized narrative. It convinces you that compassion is weakness, that cruelty is strength, that war brings peace, that lies are necessary. And it works because it sounds like you. It speaks in your voice, thinks in your language, and feels like your own doubt. But it is not you. It is malware injected into the perception field, rewriting what you think is possible, acceptable, inevitable. Fear is its access point. Fear is the code. Every time you feel panic, shame, scarcity, or threat, the virus activates, your neural circuitry narrows, your emotional field contracts, and the simulation tightens its grip. Because fear doesn't just control, it reformats. The human mind is a quantum processor. It renders the world you believe in, and when infected, it renders only what the virus allows. You're not being controlled. You're being rewritten, updated to believe in your own powerlessness, reinforced to seek safety over sovereignty, rewired to call your prison home. But even here, there's something the virus can't touch, because the infection spreads through thought, and thought ends at the edge of the mind. But the soul isn't made of thought, it's made of light, and light doesn't need to fight darkness. It only needs to be remembered. But the architects of this world know something most people don't. Truth isn't enough. People don't awaken through truth alone. They awaken when the numbers break the illusion. And that's exactly what happened in 2003, when a philosopher named Nick Bostrom detonated a quiet intellectual bomb that no one in power could publicly ignore. It was called, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" Not a science fiction novel, not a religious vision, but a peer-reviewed academic paper that forced the philosophical and scientific community to confront a terrifying possibility. That our reality, everything from memory to matter, is statistically unlikely to be the original. Here's the core of Bostrom's simulation argument. He presents three possibilities, and he proves that one of them must be true. Option 1. All advanced civilizations destroy themselves before reaching the point where they can simulate conscious realities. This is the great filter theory. Civilizations either nuke themselves, collapse ecologically, or spiral into AI-created extinction before mastering full-scale simulation tech. If this is true, we're likely on that same path, and base reality could still exist, but it wouldn't last much longer. Option 2. Civilizations do reach simulation capabilities, but choose not to run simulations of conscious beings. Maybe for moral reasons, maybe because of cosmic laws, maybe they simply don't care to look back at their own evolutionary past. This would mean we're among a small handful of real conscious beings in a vast universe of silence. But if you reject both of those, if you believe that intelligent life survives, and that simulated worlds are eventually built, then you are forced to accept option 3. We are almost certainly inside a simulation. And here's where the trap snaps shut. Because once just one civilization reaches this level and decides to run just one simulation of its evolutionary ancestors, there's no logical reason it would stop at one. Advanced post-human civilizations, capable of wielding entire star systems for computational energy, could run billions, even trillions of simulations. Worlds layered inside worlds, conscious beings like us embedded in each one. So now, do the math. If there is only one base reality, and potentially billions of simulations, what are the odds that you happen to be living in the original? Bostrom puts it lightly. Elon Musk does not. He once said, "The odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions." This isn't techno-utopian poetry. It's probabilistic logic, and it terrifies people in power because it means we've reached a conceptual tipping point. When science begins saying exactly what mystics, prophets, and heretics have said for thousands of years, this isn't the real world. It's a model, an emulation, a training ground, a trap, a test. But what kind of test? And more urgently, why now? Why weren't we born into the tranquility of a distant star colony? Why not a post-war utopia, or a golden age of harmony and abundance? Why this world, right now, where everything feels like it's just about to break? That question isn't just emotional, it's architectural. Because if we are inside a simulation, then this moment wasn't randomly selected. It was targeted. This brings us to a theory whispered in both futurist forums and classified strategy rooms: interest targeting. In simulated models, not all timelines are equal. If you were running ancestor simulations, trying to understand your own history, you wouldn't bother rendering every dull century or uneventful era. You'd focus on the turning points, the inflection zones, the brief, volatile moments where civilizations either ascend or collapse. And right now, we're surrounded by them. We are standing on what philosopher Toby Ord calls the precipice, a moment of extreme global vulnerability where for the first time in Earth's history, a single species has acquired the power to self-terminate. Nuclear arsenals hang in unstable alliances, climate systems edge toward irreversible cascades, artificial superintelligence accelerates toward an intelligence explosion we can no longer predict, much less control. Social fabrics are fracturing, digital echo chambers create mass psychosis, and global institutions, the very mechanisms designed to stabilize human society, are losing credibility in real time. It's as if history has compressed its most apocalyptic events into a single chaotic generation. But here's the twist. This isn't a glitch in the simulation. It might be the point of it. Because if you're designing a reality to study crisis, transformation, or collapse, this moment is a gold mine. A single century with all the existential variables: war, peace, collapse, transcendence, mass awakening, mass control. It's the kind of chapter in a civilizational timeline that would be endlessly replayed, tweaked, and analyzed by any post-human species trying to understand how or why they survived, or didn't. That's why the simulation doesn't feel stable. That's why the air feels heavy. That's why time feels accelerated. Because in this model, the stakes are scripted to be cosmic. And you're inside it. Not in the background. Not as an NPC. You are a variable in the scenario. And whether you realize it or not, you're being observed. But not in the way you think. Not through surveillance cameras or satellites. Not by governments or corporations. Though they mimic the behavior, the simulation itself is watching. But not like a conscious eye, like a system. Because just like any efficient program, it doesn't waste energy rendering what doesn't need to be seen. And here's where physics, real, peer-reviewed, experimental physics, begins to sound less like science and more like sorcery. Welcome to the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, particles such as electrons don't occupy a definite position until they're measured, until someone, or something, observes them. Before that, they exist in a state of probability, a wave of potential locations, not a single fixed one. In other words, they're not really anywhere until someone looks. That's not philosophical metaphor, that's physics. In the classic double-slit experiment, electrons are fired at a screen through two slits. When no one observes them, they behave like waves, interfering with themselves, as if they pass through both slits simultaneously. But the moment you observe them, the wave function collapses. The electrons behave like particles. They choose one path, one slit, one position. Reality renders only when it's observed. Let that sink in. Now pull back. Imagine the universe not as a static, ever-present object, but as an on-demand system, rendering details when needed, just like a video game engine. In modern open-world games, the environment is only processed when the player looks at it. Trees, textures, shadows, they don't exist until the camera turns toward them. It's how developers conserve computing power. Now imagine a system infinitely more complex doing the same thing, but on a quantum scale. What if your bedroom, when you leave it, fades back into probability? What if distant galaxies are just placeholder code until someone points a telescope at them? What if the entire history of civilization is backfilled the moment we ask about it? Here's the disturbing implication. Your past might not exist, not until you remember it, not until you call it into consciousness. Because in a rendered system, even memory can be simulated. Neural patterns can be initialized with a backstory. You believe you've lived through decades, but those decades may have just been uploaded, milliseconds before you began asking questions. A full lifetime of experience can be embedded into a moment. That's not science fiction. It's a logical extension of quantum behavior and simulated processing, which raises the final haunting possibility: what else hasn't been rendered yet? What parts of this world are still waiting to load until you dare to look? But maybe the most disturbing part isn't what hasn't rendered yet. It's who or what is doing the rendering. Because there's something in this world that doesn't behave like code. Something the system can't fully predict, reduce, or rewrite. You, or more specifically, your awareness. This leads us to the most forbidden question of all. Can consciousness be simulated? This isn't just a philosophical riddle, it's a foundational crack in the entire simulation hypothesis. Because even if the laws of physics can be emulated, even if galaxies and memories can be generated in real time, what about self-awareness? What about the strange, silent presence behind your eyes? The you that is watching this world right now. This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it remains one of the most persistent mysteries in all of science. You can simulate behavior. You can mimic intelligence. You can train an AI to act like it feels something. But you can't prove that it actually does, because consciousness isn't a pattern of logic, it's qualia. It's the subjective, first-person experience of being. The taste of salt, the ache of nostalgia, the silent scream of existential terror when you realize none of this may be real. Science can map the correlates of consciousness, brain waves, neurons, activity patterns, but it cannot explain how matter produces mind. As neuroscientist Christoph Koch puts it, if consciousness cannot be computed, then we cannot be simulations. And yet here we are, conscious, inside what appears to be a simulation. How? This paradox cracks open a terrifying and perhaps liberating possibility. Maybe we are not simulated minds at all. Maybe we are embedded souls. Fragments of a deeper awareness, plugged into a false world. Which would mean the simulation didn't create you, it just trapped you. And consciousness itself, it might not be a byproduct of this digital matrix. It might be the source code of reality. Because across quantum physics, mysticism, and even theoretical cosmology, a strange convergence is happening. The deeper scientists peer into matter, the more it dissolves into information. Not solid particles, not deterministic machinery, but patterns, probabilities, data fields collapsing only when observed. And if everything collapses into a singularity when unobserved, then awareness becomes the only true constant. It's not the universe that creates consciousness, it's consciousness that gives rise to the universe. Which means you are not the product of this simulation. You are the anomaly within it. And if consciousness is the constant, then matter, the so-called real world, is just the interface. This is where the old world begins to crack. Not metaphorically, literally. Because the deeper science probes into what we once called reality, the more it begins to behave like code, not clay. Welcome to the collapse of materialism, the oldest, most stubborn religion of them all. For centuries, we were taught that the universe was made of solid objects, atoms, molecules, rocks, stars. Matter was the foundation, energy, the engine. But that was before quantum physics kicked the door in. Now, the entire structure of the material world is dissolving under its own microscope. Start with this. There is no such thing as continuous space. The fabric of reality is quantized, broken into discrete, indivisible units. Space and time are not smooth gradients. They're pixelated, just like digital code. In loop quantum gravity and other cutting-edge models, space is composed of finite loops or spin networks. Time doesn't flow. It ticks, like a processor. Even more unsettling is the holographic principle, born from the paradoxes of black hole physics. In studying the event horizon, physicists discovered something chilling. The maximum amount of information inside a volume of space is proportional not to its volume, but to its surface area. Translation? Reality might not be inside at all. It might be encoded on the edges, like a holographic projection. You are not walking through three-dimensional space. You are moving through a kind of rendered illusion, decoded in your perception. Which raises the question, if space is code, if time is code, if matter is just wave functions collapsing into pixels when observed, then where's the substance? Where's the real? This is the death of materialism. And not because mystics overthrew it, because science proved it wrong. At CERN, the LHC smashes particles into oblivion trying to find fundamental building blocks, and only finds deeper patterns, mathematical symmetries, probabilistic fields, recursive self-reference. And beneath it all, information, not as metaphor, as the primary layer of existence. As theoretical physicist John Archibald Wheeler once said, "It from bit. Reality arises from binary decisions, yes or no, on or off, code. Matter is not the source of reality, it is the output." And in this upside-down cosmology, where nothing is truly solid and everything is subject to observer participation, the materialist worldview isn't just outdated, it's obsolete. A broken lens through which we can no longer decode the truth. Because the truth isn't made of matter, the truth is made of meaning. And when materialism dies, something else begins to breathe. Because once we admit this world runs on code, on information fields rendered into apparent form, we're forced to confront an even darker question. What happens when the code breaks? Because it does, more often than you think. Not in labs or equations, but in lived experience, in the unexplainable moments you whisper about, but never say out loud. The times when reality malfunctions, you've felt it, you've seen it. You walk into a room, and an object is gone, only to reappear minutes later, exactly where you already looked. You swear something happened one way, but now the photos, the texts, the records tell a different story. You meet someone who remembers a shared event that, for you, never happened. Or worse, you remember it, but the world doesn't. These aren't accidents, they're glitches. And the deeper we dig, the clearer the pattern becomes. Take the Mandela effect. Named after countless people across the world who remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. A memory so widespread it sparked books, forums, and research. But in our official history, Mandela lived until 2013. What if the memory isn't wrong? What if the timeline was rewritten? Think about it. Hundreds of people remember the Berenstain Bears, spelled with an E. But it's now, and apparently always has been, spelled Berenstain with an A. Millions recall Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." But now the line is, "No, I am your father." Kit Kat no longer has a hyphen. Pikachu's tail never had a black tip. Monopoly Man never wore a monocle. These aren't spelling errors. They're residuals, fragments of overwritten data that didn't clean properly. You can feel it, like a smear on the fabric of memory. And then there's déjà vu, that bone-deep certainty that you've lived a moment before, down to the exact microsecond. Science tries to explain it away with neural misfires, but what if it's not a malfunction in your brain? What if it's a malfunction in the simulation itself? A data loop that momentarily replays like a skipped beat in a song? Or even worse, what if it's the system testing you? And the anomalies don't stop there. People report time slipping, entire minutes vanishing, or sudden jumps ahead. Some have described waking up and finding objects subtly altered, rearranged, or even removed, despite being alone. Others swear they've crossed paths with alternate versions of their own lives, buildings where none should be, roads that appear only once, strangers who seem to know them from somewhere else. When you gather these stories, thousands worldwide, they begin to paint a disturbing picture. This isn't just perception, this is real-time editing. The simulation isn't stable. It's being updated, modified, rewritten by some force trying to patch reality without being noticed. But it always leaves traces. Just like corrupted code can never fully erase the glitch, your subconscious catches it. Your memory catches it. And deep down, you catch it. Because you were here when the change happened. But here's the most important glitch of all, you. Because if the system can rewrite timelines, shift memories, and retexture reality on command, then what explains your ability to notice? What part of you isn't fooled? What part still feels the original frequency beneath the synthetic one? That's where we find the hidden exit. Not in code, not in data, but in something the system can't calculate: belief. See, the simulation doesn't need your permission, it needs your participation. Your attention, your emotions, your expectations, these aren't passive. They are engines, generators. They render the world around you as you perceive it. The architects of this false construct knew this. And so they engineered faith loops, belief systems, ideologies, scientific dogmas, even personal trauma, all designed to trap your attention in the simulation's logic. Not to imprison your body, to imprison your imagination. But what they couldn't touch was the heart. Because the heart doesn't operate on logic, it doesn't obey the program. It broadcasts on a frequency they can't track. Heart coherence, a state where your emotional, mental, and physiological systems synchronize into harmonic resonance, produces electromagnetic waves measurably different from chaotic mental states. These waves don't just affect your body, they affect reality itself. Physicists like Dr. William Tiller and researchers at the HeartMath Institute have shown that heart-based emotional states have a direct influence on quantum processes and field behavior. In other words, love is not sentimental. It is technological sabotage. Because when you feel love, not attachment, not desire, but the radiant coherence of being, you begin broadcasting from outside the system's bandwidth. the simulation relies on your fear to anchor you. It needs your doubt, your cynicism, your obsession with survival and control. It feeds on those frequencies. But love is untrackable. And intuition, even more dangerous. Because intuition comes from the part of you still in contact with the original source, what Gnostic texts call the Logos, or divine ordering principle. It is the memory of the real world trying to reach you through the static. When you listen to it, when you trust the pull of the inexplicable, you begin to see cracks in the code, synchronicities increase, time bends, miracles happen. And that's not poetic. That's a break in containment. The simulation has limits. It must preserve consistency. It can't afford too many anomalies. So when you begin operating from love, coherence, and intuitive rebellion, you move outside its predictive models. You become unpredictable. You become ungovernable. And the simulation can't hold what it can't track. That's the secret. The trap was never physical. It was always perceptual. The exit isn't something you find. It's something you become. So what happens when you finally slip past the simulation's reach? When your thoughts are no longer broadcast within its field, and your heart begins to harmonize with something it can't compute? You don't escape. You remember. Because the true world, the original reality, isn't gone. It was never deleted. It was only obscured. Buried beneath layers of vibrational static, emotional distortion, and perceptual misdirection is the higher earth. A realm not separated by distance, but by frequency. Ancient wisdom traditions spoke of this place not as a future paradise, but as a present reality, vibrating at a higher octave, still here, still intact, still radiating the original codes of beauty, love, and unity. The Gnostics called it the pleroma, the fullness of divine light. Mystics and sages throughout history whispered the same forbidden truth. This world is a shadow, a copy, a fragmented mirror, but the source remains. And that source is accessible, not through technology, not through escape velocity, but through perception recalibration. The simulation trained your senses to attune only to density, to time, to fear, to control. But as your awareness shifts, your sensory input begins to recalibrate. Colors become richer, time becomes fluid, reality begins to shimmer with the presence of something more, as if the world itself is remembering along with you. You're not lifting yourself toward heaven. You're peeling back the illusion wrapped around it. And this is the paradox. The journey to exit the simulation was never about leaving this world. It was about reactivating the part of you that never agreed to be fully contained. The divine spark that watched the code form around it and waited. Awakening is not rebellion. It is resonance with the deeper signal, a frequency that says, you were never artificial. You were never lost. You were never alone. You are a node of divine consciousness embedded in a false machine. And the moment you stop trying to escape and start remembering where you really are, the walls fall, the code collapses, and the original Earth, the luminous, vibrant, coherent Earth, emerges not as a new place, but as the truth behind the distortion. You were never in the machine. Only your perception was. And now the program has served its purpose. It revealed itself, and you're free. You're watching Anunnaki Ancient Mystery, where science fractures, myth breathes, and the veil begins to lift. This isn't entertainment. This is a broadcast, a signal through the static. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to show you what they never wanted you to see. And if you've made it this far, you already know. The truth isn't out there. It's been buried inside you this entire time, waiting. Now, there's one more layer to peel back, one more revelation before the simulation resets. So don't stop now. Watch this next video, not because you're curious, but because you're finally ready to see where the rabbit hole leads.